Hello, I'm your host, Frances Hickmott, a self-leadership keynote speaker, author, and mentor, and the founder of the Global Self-Leadership Summit. And today it's my pleasure to introduce to you Gemma Perkins. After participating in a youth leadership program in her teenage years, Gemma discovered her passion for helping others to grow, self-discover, and develop effective interpersonal relationships. She now runs a training company helping people to develop their core capacities and learn about self-leadership. Hooray! Her first class degree in psychology and PGCE in teaching ensures a theoretical approach to her sessions, which is balanced against 14 years of experience in practical leadership training. Gemma is an advocate of learning through play and can often be seen ditching PowerPoint in favor of beanbags, blindfolds, spaghetti, and other interesting equipment. She works locally and internationally with a broad range of audiences, graduates, the volunteer sector, intergenerational groups, and community activists. Gemma is a firm believer in Gandhi's mantra, "You must be the change you wish to see in the world." And this is reflected in her approach to training others. Gemma, so glad to have you here.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, I always do a little bit of background research on the people that are coming in, and I was really intrigued to see that you've got your blue belt in karate. So can you tell me about what inspired you to take karate? And I mean, some people start and then they ditch it. So you went through a few levels. Can you tell us about that?
Oh, goodness. So I started karate in my teenage years. Probably I'd have been 13 at the time, and was quite introverted. And in my school setting, I found I was one of the few people who enjoyed learning, and that made me a bit of a target for bullying and things. So the karate was about giving me a sense of confidence.
Nice.
But why I really stuck with it is because I'm not a terribly sporty person, but I found it was a very mentally engaging sport as well as a physical one. So a lot of it was about self-discipline. Our branch of karate was non-contact. So it was very much about the technical skill of the moves. We did kata, which is putting moves together in not quite a dance, but a sequence. So yeah, I probably stuck with that for about 8 years, and then as I went to university and started working, it was a bit harder to manage.
Sure.
But the ideas kind of, still stick with me. And I found a couple of weeks ago, I did a kickboxing class for fun, and somebody said, "Oh, you've done martial arts before," so that it kind of comes through in the way you hold your posture. It's interesting.
Nice. Thanks for sharing that. So can you tell us a bit more about your journey from where you started in the field of self-development to where you are now?
Yeah, so my journey is very interesting, and I like looking back on it because it's entirely accidental at the beginning, at least. So when I was at college, so in the UK, that would be 15, 16 years old. I was aware that it was always good to get extracurricular activities on your CV, and the two options available were a residential leadership program, and then another, we have the Duke of Edinburgh Award, which is camping and outdoor skills and teamwork. And entirely by accident, I just went, well, I don't like camping, so I'll do the leadership course. And there was very little thought put into it. But I turned up at this leadership event with no friends, lacking a lot of confidence. I'd moved to college and didn't know anybody there. I'd always been a really shy individual. And this 3-day course just absolutely changed my entire sense of self. It really helped me to understand who I was, why I got on with the people that I did, how to overcome my weaknesses. I met my best friend on the course, so she was at my college, and I'd never really properly spoken to her at the time, but it really created a bond for us. So it was very personally transformational in that couple of days for me. But what was even better was the gentleman running it, who's my friend and colleague, Krish, said, if you've enjoyed this event, you can come back and learn to mentor others, and we will teach you mentoring skills. And I jumped at the chance, and I've been involved ever since. So that idea that leadership is circular, and that if you're, you know, given a gift or a skill or knowledge, learning to pass it on to others was very firmly rooted in me from then on. And I kind of worked my way up, mentoring others, learning how to coach, doing my teaching course, and just knew that I think purpose is a strong word, but even then I had a sense that it was my purpose and passion to do this kind of work. And I'm very lucky to have that, because I know that some people get into their adult life and are still looking for their purpose.
That's really true. That's really true. Thank you. So what does the term self-awareness mean to you?
So I think self-awareness, I mean, it is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
It's knowing all the parts of yourself. Awareness doesn't necessarily mean you're working on them, but you know who you are. And I think it's important to be aware there's different parts of us. So there's our values, there's our behaviors, our skills, our emotional triggers, the things that bring us comfort. And the more detail in which you know yourself, the better you can communicate with others, the better you can inform your decisions and behavior. And there will always be times where we make snap decisions, and that we just work on a stereotype or a bias. But we can avoid that a lot more if we understand, right, oh, I'm feeling this way because this is my pattern, or these are my preferences. I'm wanting to argue back because I value this and you value something different.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, self-awareness is the starting point for making well-informed choices and for being the best versions of ourselves.
Nice, nice. How self-aware do you think people actually are?
Psychologically, the studies kind of show that people aren't, and it's not a bad thing. It's very normal not to be. So we have things called cognitive biases, errors in our thinking, and they happen all the time. Things like we assume people think the same way we do because we surround ourselves with people with similar opinions.
Yeah.
You know, and we see this even more with social media and echo chambers. If you ask people, you know, to self-rate their abilities, lots of people rate themselves as more capable than they are, and lots of people rate themselves as less capable than they are. And it might be a mixture of, you know, for those who can do something, well, I can do it, it's easy, surely everybody can do this, so it's not that unique. So they downplay themselves. And people who can't do it, or aren't maybe as well polished, maybe there are kind of those biases that say, well, maybe other people aren't as good, or, oh, I could do that if I spent more time on it, so I'll overinflate the self-assessment. And actually that makes it really interesting, because when you're working in the field of training or leadership and you're working with people, the fact that a lot of people don't know quite what they can and can't do, whether that's a skill, a behavior, it makes it a little bit hard to work with them. So actually, for me, the first point of any training really is to establish that self-awareness, to be more realistic. If you don't deal with that, you can't actually make a lot of gains in actually training people to develop whatever it is you're trying to develop with them.
That's really interesting. I think when you talk about how people, I want to say overbelieve, inflate their capability. I know that they say that about driving, right? So especially older drivers will think that they've nailed it, that their driving is fantastic. And yet if they were to take a driving test, they might find themselves a little bit surprised on the curve. Yeah. And I absolutely agree about the idea around the things that we do well and we underplay them. So, you know, as a for instance, I'm actually a pretty decent writer, but I didn't know that until I was well into my adulthood, because I just thought everybody could. And it wasn't until I heard one of my coworkers, she was actually one of the supervisors, she said, oh my gosh, like I've just been working on this memo forever. And I'm like, what? Because it just never occurred to me that someone would struggle with something like that. And that's where that self-awareness and that, you know, matching up to ability. So you're bang on. I totally get that. And I can see why it would be one of the first things you'd need to address when you're doing the training. That's really interesting. You work with both youth and adults.
Yep.
How are they similar and different in their levels of self-awareness?
Ooh. So I think for young people, they tend to be, my experience is that they're more open-minded about what they can and can't do. When you look at learning models, the first stage of learning is unconscious incompetence. I don't know, I can't do that thing. So when I work with young people and teach them about personality types or communication methods, to them, they go, wow, this is new. Because it's new, I know I can't do that. And now they're consciously incompetent. And they're very open to saying, I didn't know that thing before. Now that I know it, I can't do it. Teach me. Mm-hmm. Adults are a bit different because they've been around the block and they might have been on lots of different courses where they say, listening skills is the classic. So I still teach people active listening skills. I think it's a very underrated skill and lots of us are bad at it. Even when I deliver training on it, but there are times when I can be distracted and not use active listening. We're all guilty of it. Mm-hmm. When I teach children, here are ways of listening more effectively. They're really into it and they see the value in it. When I'm working with older groups, there's a little bit of a resistance and perhaps, we've been listening for 50 years. We're already good at it. So I think there can be a little bit of resistance in adult groups or more overinflation just because, there's an assumption and a bias, which is valid, that, well, I've been around for a while, I've got experience, and because I've put the time in, I must be better at it than a young person would be. It doesn't cause too much of a problem for me because of the way I work around it. Mm-hmm. I do a lot of activities that, rather than asking people, how good are you at this? I show them by putting them through a practical exercise. So I can win people over pretty quickly, but it does change the initial dynamic. But I do a lot of work with adults and children together.
Oh,
and that's fascinating.
Yeah, tell me about that.
So I've worked for a couple of an intergenerational conference, and I think I've had a 6-year-old in the same training session as a 60-year-old talking about inclusion and values. Oh, and what's interesting when you work intergenerationally is there's a lot to be gained on both sides. Mm-hmm. So young people have a certain eagerness, enthusiasm, optimism, fascinating imagination. They can really kind of play around with questions, activities. If you give them a creative team building activity, they come up with unusual answers that we as adults have kind of grown out of. Mm-hmm. And adults have got a lot more knowledge, experience, and real world application that they can bring to it. So when it's handled carefully, you can really get a broad discussion going. As long as the adults are equipped and prepared to speak in child-friendly ways and not use over-complex language, mm-hmm. you can actually have really fascinating discussions where they learn from each other. These have always been groups who've volunteered to work intergenerationally, though. I don't know whether, person on the street might find it a little bit harder to do. But I think, there's the self-awareness between them is a little bit different. But when they observe each other, it's interesting because adults are able to tell children, here's your next step on the journey, here's what you've got to learn to get better. And children can be delightfully honest about saying, I don't understand that, you need to word it differently, or you weren't very kind to your friend there. So there's a certain joy in seeing these different communication patterns broaden people's horizons.
Well, kids don't really have a filter, right? And so they'll just say whatever's on their mind, and it is kind of refreshing. And if you can take it for what it is, I really think it can help you be in the moment for sure, and take a look and see as they see. I think, oh my gosh, I think that would be so fascinating. I'm
And
kind
adults are sometimes over-filtered.
yeah,
So we're perhaps taught to, you know, dance around an issue. And I do think there's a place for sensitive communication, but sensitive doesn't have to be unclear. Children
right.
are just direct. And they, you know, over time they'll learn to be less confrontational about it, or, you know, will take into account people's feelings and be tactful. But that directness is something that is to be valued.
It can be really refreshing, actually. Yeah. So tell me about the kinds of activities that you use to help people uncover their actual state of self-awareness. And I'm really fascinated by the play idea.
Okay. I mean, it's hard to kind of settle down on one, and I use different activities for different things. When people first come into my sessions, I normally say, right, we'll start with a warm-up. So it's a little bit of a ruse, because to them, they just think it's an unrelated activity. And I think that's quite important, actually, at the beginning, that people just think they're having fun and they don't overthink things.
Yes.
So one such activity that I can tell you about. So I'll mention the spaghetti, because I kind of, you know, that was in the introduction.
Yeah.
So I might get people into teams of maybe 4 and hand them a pile of spaghetti, marshmallows, sheet of paper, and say, right, you've got 3 minutes to build the tallest tower in your team. You're competing with the other teams. Off you go. So to them, they're just, you know, they've got a goal in mind. If it's an activity where there's an end goal, people forget to question the process, and that makes it very interesting. So what happens is there's normally a trial and error stage where people are just shoving things together, and then one of the more logical thinkers or introverts in the team starts saying, I really think we should do it this way. They get into discussions about what shape is the most structurally sound, how do we make sure it's tall, reinforce it. So they have these interesting discussions, and while they're doing that, I just circulate and listen. And I think for me, the activity is not the important part. The important part is the debrief afterwards. How you coach people once they've completed something is more valuable than what they've done. And, you know, I've seen a lot of youth leadership things where people say, oh yeah, you know, we got them to build a bridge across a river, so they learnt leadership. But they only learnt leadership if they talked about how they did it. So once they've played this game, we congratulate the winning team and then say, right, now, what was your strategy? What was your process? Each one of these questions come with, you know, a lot of discussion and input from them. But I might sort of go to individuals and say, I noticed you were doing a lot of the talking. How did the team decide that? How were you communicating? I noticed you came up with an idea halfway through. How was it received? Did you feel comfortable being a leader or a follower? Did you challenge something that you thought would go wrong? Did you play more of a harmonious role of keeping the team together rather than focusing on the task? And by asking these questions, people start to realize what they do actually do. If people come to a leadership course and you say, right, who already sees themselves as a leader, you know, however many people put their hands up, but then when they're in a task, is that true? Do they actually see themselves? Do they volunteer to lead? Do they get nominated to lead because they seem to have the most technical skill or knowledge? And so the 5-minute activity actually leads to 20 minutes of discussion that lets you take a baseline. And I'll always make the point that, you know, this is just a playful activity. This isn't real life. Maybe you took a following role in this because you've never built a tower before and you thought you'd leave it to somebody else with more expertise. But are there other types of things in your life, work or personal, where you do take the leadership because you're more comfortable? Okay, what are they? How do you communicate with others? Are you a quiet voice? Do you wait your turn? Do you jump in because you're excited? And so we use these to kind of reveal where they're at. And I'll use multiple examples normally. So we might play a game and then do a session on, right, what's your personality archetype? And then we'll do another game that just focuses on that. But I think that idea of actually finding out what people do is more important than asking them what they do.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very revealing. I have another one that when I'm teaching people how to facilitate others and to learn coaching skills, I ask people to pair up and do an activity, and one person's role is to help the other. And it doesn't even matter what the activity is. The fact is their role is the helper. And what always happens is that the helper tells the other person what to do to be successful. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, do it this way, do that. Oh, that was really good, change it this way.
Right.
And even with a room full of teachers, if I ask a group of teachers, do you use coaching skills? Yes, we do. Okay, but when they play this game, they always revert back to telling the other person what to do. Mm-hmm. And so it just shows that difference, that just because we know how to do something in our head doesn't mean we implement it, which is why you have to use games, role play, simulation, activities, team tasks, problem solving to find out what people really do. Yeah. And then you can debrief it with questions. You can film it and play it back. That's a lot of fun.
I bet that's fascinating.
Because you can pause it at different points and say, right, how did you come to that decision, or how were you feeling then? And what does that say about you? How do you prefer to work? And once people know where they're at, that's when you can say, are you happy with where you're at? What would you like to change? What skills can we layer on top of what you've already got? And it has to be a safe space. It's not about dragging people down, even when people have been quite challenging, or we've played a conflict game and somebody's been a little bit over competitive. It's fine. It's not about it's not about dragging people down. It's about saying that happens for a reason and that's normal. You have learned to be like that. Do you want to stay like that or try something different? And if either way, we'll help you through it.
So I'm curious about gender differences within groups and how it kind of plays out, because I feel like men have a particular way of being with each other and women have a particular way of being with each other, but within a leadership dynamic, I guess I'm just curious about how that plays out. I don't know what your observations are, or what you see, or
I'm not sure if I would notice an obvious difference because I don't work in the corporate world. Mm-hmm. I work more with students,
right,
and third sector and community.
Right.
And so perhaps traditional business gender, I say traditional, I know they are constantly changing, but that perhaps established male leadership isn't as obvious in those groups. Having said that, in some of the team activities that we play, there can be a tendency for males to be more or less inhibited about sharing their ideas. Mm-hmm. But for me, I would think personality type seems to play more of a part than gender. So we often use the 4-type temperaments personality. Mm-hmm. I know that there's lots of other personality models out there. Myers-Briggs is probably the biggest, but 16 types is sometimes a little bit difficult to work with. But generally speaking, those who are more extroverted self-select as leaders more frequently. They like to do their thinking on the outside, and so whatever the team activity is, they're the ones that answer the questions, they're the ones that suggest the ideas. Right. And that's pretty consistent across gender, I would find.
Yeah. That's okay. This might not be your thing, but it just kind of cropped up in my head. I was just kind of curious. So
yeah, I think going back to the cognitive bias, I seem to recall from my psychology studies that in a business setting, men are more likely to overrate their abilities than women. Mm-hmm. And perhaps that can come into things a little bit where women maybe underplay because they're not as comfortable with that world. Or I guess narratives of leadership in the past have been very much political leadership, you know, social movements. So Martin Luther King, Gandhi, and you know, in politics, lots of the leadership figures are men.
Yeah.
And so some people, when they first come to my courses, think that being a leader is to be the one person in charge telling everybody else what to do. And so I always open by saying, you know, this is self-leadership. This is about how you understand yourself and how you hold your own behavior, how you know yourself and interact with those in a small circle, because the way you decide how to behave, the way your principles and values work, will determine whether people choose to be around you or not. And many of us are leaders in lots of settings, whether that's, you know, a mother in a family, a leader in a friendship group for whatever activity it is. And so once I outline that and demystify my view of leadership, I find that some of the women in the room feel a little bit more comfortable then, because I think they're worried that perhaps a leader is, I'm in charge of a company or I'm the manager of a department. And they forget that, you know, leadership occurs in lots of different places.
So true. So true. So how useful is self-reflection in the process of developing self-awareness?
I would say essential. Yeah, I think we live in a very busy world, and self-reflection can be difficult for some people to do. It's not well taught either. There's a big movement now to do it more through things like meditation and quiet time and journaling. But I think for a lot of people, their early experiences are to spend time doing instead of thinking about doing. But actually, I think it's that reflection that lets you work out what could have been better next time. How do I feel about that? And so I think those who are leaders need to find ways of asking the right questions that let people reflect. Question is such an important skill. I think it's the most important thing I feel I do as part of my role. And some people find that unusual. They think that, oh, well, if you're training in leadership, surely you're telling people what to do. No, I'm asking people the right questions so that they can decide for themselves what they want to do. And finding ways to make reflection interesting as well. A lot of people don't like to sit quietly. They're not used to being with their thoughts or comfortable. So finding ways of encouraging people to reflect that allow them to express, to think more deeply. So one example, my favorite thing to do, I usually do this as a little introduction if I'm doing a 2-day training or we're coming back after an afternoon, or if we've done a heavy topic. I put lots of picture cards all over the floor, random pictures. So it might be a clearing in a forest, fireworks, a roller coaster, a chess set. And they're just open-ended. And I'll ask people a question such as, how are you feeling right now? You know, that's standard, but it might be, pick a picture that most captures your personality or your best quality. Or how would you like to be going forward? When you talk about leadership, which picture best captures your opinion? So you can ask any open-ended question and let people just walk around the room and look at 40 pictures and pick one, and then they give a description, and the quality of that reflection and description is enhanced by the fact that the stimulus was there. If I just ask people, how are you feeling? They'll say happy, sad, excited, tired. But when they've got these pictures, they might pick the roller coaster and say, you know, I'm a bit overwhelmed by how many things we've done, but it's exciting and I feel that I'm over the loop and now I'm getting to the end. They wouldn't have said that before. So things like that, asking people to draw a picture that summarizes the top 3 things they've taken away from something, or to look back on how they carried out an activity and bullet point the process that they went through, or talking through with a partner and coming up with 5 key words to sum up what's gone on. So I think having being able to scaffold people into ways of reflecting that aren't just sitting quietly with your own thoughts is really, really key. And having a range of techniques allows people to work out the best way for them to be self-aware. Some people are happy just thinking, but other people need to move or to draw or to find their creative expression in order to be able to unlock that.
You know, it seems to me what you're saying there, given the current state of the world right now and all the self-isolation and the social distancing and all of that, what an opportunity to teach people how to ask questions of themselves and even of their family members in a way that allows people to really bring up what they're feeling in all those different places, and really have the opportunity for some deep conversations that go beyond maybe the surface level that we're used to having. Like, it just seems like that's such a gift that could be given to people in these days when they're just facing situations that we've never faced before. I just, and it is all about the questions, right? It's all about the questions. And for those of us that are introverts, and I can raise my hand there, self-reflection is kind of a part of my, my gig. It's kind of what I do. But when I've been working with people and we talk about journaling and they go, but I don't know what to put, or I don't know what to write. And so then it's about, bringing out the questions so that they could, oh yeah, I never thought, oh yeah, I could write about that, or I could look at that. So do you do distance learning at all? Do you do webinars or that sort of thing?
I've done a little bit of distance learning. So when I've been working on the international events, I've done training over Skype. Mm-hmm. And for one of the other charities that I did some work for, again, sort of training. The nature of my activities means it's challenging. I do a lot of stuff where, I'll get 12 people tangling each other up with string. Mm-hmm. And so it loses something by not having that in person. So I think the theories and the content that I cover can be done online, mm-hmm. but I haven't yet worked out the best way to do the activity-based stuff, because I think sometimes you need to bounce off people in real time. Having said that, a lot of the reflective things that I cover, I think would work in real time. Asking people those kind of coaching, deep level questions would work that way. Yeah. And now's the time to look at doing it.
Now's the time.
But I want to go back to what you said about the journaling though, because I think that I don't know what to write, or a lot of people feel limited because they're worried it won't be the right thing. Mm-hmm. And certainly in the UK, and I think, I guess across a lot of education systems, there's a bit of a tendency to only answer with the right answer. Or if we're writing a report or essay, it's for somebody else's eyes and it has to be to a certain standard. Yeah. And I think that perhaps trains out of us that, painting for the sake of painting, or writing for the sake of writing, and just the enjoyment of it. There tends to be that fear that somebody's going to look at this and judge whether it's right or wrong, good or bad. And so people might be put off creative exploration because it doesn't work, or it isn't right. And I think when I've done meditation classes with people, a lot of people after their first meditation might say, oh, well, it didn't make me happy, it didn't work. And they forget that it's about the process of rather than the end result. And it's going to take a lot of culture change to get around that, really, for people.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Actually, I read something this morning about the most effective CEOs, the ones that are doing the best in this time of upheaval, who are really displaying excellent leadership within their organizations. Across the board, the top ones meditate. And there was a time when it wasn't really taken seriously, right? I kind of joke about it and say, well, before science could see what was happening in the brain, they were like, yeah, there's stories, but we don't know how to measure this. And then once they could, it was like, oh yeah, this is a thing. Like, we just shouldn't be doing it. So it is, that is an interesting piece, but you're right. I think we're tied into so much the outcome based, like it has to have a purpose and a reason. And if you can't see that right away, then, what's the use? And so it is a measure of personal development in order to embrace some of that play-like activities just for the sake of play and what comes up for you from that.
I always remember a panel discussion with a gentleman from India who ran 4 hospitals. Wow. And he was a very big supporter of morning meditation. He said, I always have, always start the day with an hour of meditation. And for him, it was, partly about listening to the inner voice and partly it had a religious element to it. And one of the audience members asked a question, said, but what about on a really busy day? Do you still meditate for an hour? And he went, no, on a busy day, I meditate for 2 hours. And it was funny, it was memorable, but I guess the purpose, he was saying that the more things you're wrestling with and the more you've got going on, the more important it is that you start the day with a really strong sense of self. Mm-hmm. And I think for a lot of people, meditation, as you said, the brain science shows that it improves the connections, it calms you, it gets rid of the stress chemicals that are flowing around your body. But I think in terms of the human spirit, it gives you that bit of thinking time to sort out your priorities, to just reconnect with your values, so that when you are faced with a challenge in the day, you are able to act more authentically because you're very connected to your internal compass. People who don't have that time to self-reflect or think about things will just make snap decisions and have reflex reactions, and sometimes they'll be the right ones, but sometimes they might come to regret it, because we can get pulled in all sorts of directions unless we set our own direction.
So do you do, and you mentioned values a few times, which is absolutely fundamental to our self-leadership and self-awareness. So do you do values-based exercises to help people define their values? Because I feel like it's something that's not talked about very often. A lot of people aren't even sure what their values are. Do you think that's right?
Yeah, I think there's also a difficulty of language as well, because so there's values, virtues, principles, ethics, all these different things that can get muddled around, and because we're not sure of the similarities and differences, it can be hard to address it. With some groups, it depends what I've been asked to do for people, sure. Depends what the purpose is, but yes, I do like to bring it in one way or another. I think sometimes I do it on an individual basis of, what are your drivers? When I teach about time management, I often bring identity and values into it. So I might say, what are all the jobs that you do or doing this week? And so people brainstorm a load of the things, and I say, right, what are the values and roles that you play that you really care about? So for some people it might be, I have a strong sense of being a daughter, being a bookworm, being a community activist. And then we compare that to how they're actually spending their time and look for discrepancies. And we bring it back to their values and talk about, you play these roles because they mean something to your sense of self. They must be fulfilling your values and your purpose. That's why you've said you're important. They're important. But if you're not doing them, you're going to feel a cognitive dissonance, an emotional issue. So how can we write that? So sometimes we'll use the values and principles and things to explore how people choose to spend their time.
Nice.
I do quite a lot of work with graduate teams and student unions. So the leadership teams of student unions are very interesting because I get them to look at a list of virtues. So qualities such as honesty, empathy, transparency, power, success, just open-ended words, and say, right, what words drive you in your behaviour as an individual? And then they circle a few, and then we say, right, in your role as a team member, what virtues do you think should be driving your team? And they'll spend maybe anywhere between half an hour for an organised team and 90 minutes for a team that has to do a lot of discussion around word meanings and comparisons. They really get to understand each other and what matters to each other, and they think about their role as an accountable public-facing organisation, and it can feed really nicely into their leadership, because if they come out of it at the end with five key words that they say, right, these are the words that drive all our behaviour and decisions. We are always going to be, and whatever it is, whether it's accountable, fun, they decide these words, and that can inform the way they start meetings, the way they publicise events, the way they deal with disciplinary action. Whatever it is, it's about giving people that compass that lets them drive behaviour.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I bet it really allows people to dig deep into who they want to be and how they're actually living, or how they're actually performing at work, or how they're actually interacting with those around them in and out of work. And I think identifying how we spend our time, that's key. I just think there's so many opportunities in this really challenging time that we're living in, because it allows us to really dig in. And I think that we need leadership, people like yourself, who are helping people to identify what it is that how they want to be, how they choose to be. So I'm going to go to a couple of quick questions here, my friend. Okay. What's the best piece of advice you've received on your own journey of self-awareness and self-leadership?
The first thing that came to mind isn't actually a piece of advice. It's a scenario, if I may share.
Yeah, please do.
So my colleague and mentor, Krish, is a very wise man and really helped me to understand what it means to be a leader. And when I was much younger, I asked him if he could teach me how to do family therapy so that I could help my family with a lot of issues that were going on. Mm-hmm. And he agreed, and we spent 8 weeks working through textbooks and learning the skills. And by the end of it, the thing that I learned was that it wasn't my responsibility. That I could choose to help them if I wanted, but that it wasn't my burden to carry. And he could have told me that at the beginning. He could have just said, you don't need to do that. But he spent the time letting me discover for myself. And so that really embodies leadership and coaching for me. And I think I take that with me with my interactions with other people, and know that it's more important to let people, to walk with people on their journey than it is to point the way.
Yes, that's thank you for sharing that. That's phenomenal. And I really do think it is. It's the things that we discover as we go along that hold tight within us, that help us, down the road, right? In other situations, if someone just tells us this is, it's not your job to do that, that may go by the wayside. But if you embody it, if you hold it, then you can continue to live that. So that's beautiful. Do you have one routine or habit that you think is important in your success?
Being sort of a business owner means that I don't have many routines. Every day is a little bit different. Mm-hmm. One thing that I do that I think everybody should try and do is a gratitude journal. I'm not sure that it's linked to my success, but it's certainly linked to my well-being, is So I'm not very good with morning meditation. I'm more of an evening person. So I always end the day with, I'd now do 6 things. It started off as 3, but 6 things that I'm grateful for. And it can be, you know, people I've enjoyed spending time with, things I've learned, things I've achieved. Sometimes if it's been a challenge, it might be that, you know, I'm grateful that challenge has allowed me to learn something. But I think a small reflection every day on what's gone well, it lifts your mood, it boosts your memory. It's, you know, scientifically, there's all sorts of benefits to gratitude journaling. But I think just personally, it also lifts your spirits and reminds you that life is tough, but if you take it one day at a time, it's a lot easier.
Totally agreed. And, you know, the interesting thing to me, and I think that anybody who views more than a couple of the interviews is going to find that is the common theme. Every time I ask that question, that's been the answer. It has been about being thankful and expressing and acknowledging gratitude of what there is. It just it's very interesting.
I feel like I need to give something different now.
No,
so another thing, I'm not a daily routine, but when I'm so sometimes I deliver training on my own, but I do, whenever I'm training with a team, we always have a team debrief. No, you know, no matter whether it's a 2-hour session or a full weekend, we always spend time giving each other very detailed personal feedback of what we've done well and areas for improvement. And I think that getting that high level feedback from, you know, from being a teenager to where I am now means that helps raise, you know, goes back to the self-awareness.
Yeah.
And it also boosts, lots of people when they're doing feedback might jump straight to what needs to improve, but it's really important to know what you've done well so that you can solidify that. But I think if you're working with others, always try and find feedback, positives and areas for improvement, because that will make you more well-rounded and it will help you to grow. So I think effective leaders are always looking for opportunities to grow.
You're absolutely right. Couldn't agree more. So is there a book or resource that you recommend for someone interested in self-leadership or self-development? What's at the top of your list?
There's a couple. The first one that springs to mind is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Teenagers.
Oh,
so
nice.
I know there's the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I find that that's very business oriented and it's very detailed. But the teenage one is where I started because of my age. But I still love it now because it's got more personal development stories. It's about, there's anecdotes of young people in education settings wrestling with moral dilemmas about, you know, jumping on a bandwagon or doing something that they think is unethical, but they're not sure about. And it's a bit more, you know, it's about the person rather than the business setting. So I think there's a lot to be learned from that. And for me, learning the 7 habits at a young age was a big part of that self-leadership, because it talks about personal leadership first and then going into group leadership.
Nice.
And if you can sort out yourself, you will be a more effective leader for others.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. So that wraps up our interview. I want to thank you so much. I keep finding that all these people I'm interviewing, I'm thinking, oh, I would so love to sit down, have a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, and just talk more. So thank you so much for giving your time. It's been such a delight.
Thank you for having me.
We'll have below Gemma's bio on the site links to her great offerings and to her site if you want to find out more about her. So thanks again, Gemma. Have an excellent rest of the day and take care of yourself.
Yeah, you too. Thank you.